Good morning. This is Jason D coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Friday morning at 10 wins. So, yeah, hope everyone's doing good. It's the beginning of the weekend. Hope everyone has some plans, fun plans, especially. I'm gonna go. A really great friend of mine, Benjamin, who is just an awesome, fantastic drummer. He is He's a good friend, really great player, and I've been fortunate enough to like work with him a lot. And he's filled in uh, quite a few gigs for me when it's been. He's also when it comes to gigs, he has saved my ass more than once. He's a great dude, and so his band is playing tonight, and I have not gotten a chance to hear them. So I'm gonna go see them tonight. I'm really excited. They're a cover band, but they do some pretty cool covers. I got really interested in the stuff that they do because they cover some Portishead songs, which is, classic trip hop electronica music from the '90s. And I'm like, wow, who does that? So I want to check them out, and so that'll be exciting. Ben's a really great, fantastic drummer, and also great dude. So that'll be fun to do. So I had a couple of chances, or one or two chances before to see them, I think last year, but I wasn't able to make it out. So, and the other thing, getting back to movies, today's show is going to. I've been doing a lot of music shows lately. Been doing lots of videos on Autechre, my favorite band of all time, and also Death Heaven, pretty much the best rock metal band around. So I've been doing a lot of music shows lately, but again, always going back to the main focus of this channel, and that's going to be movies. So I might do a show. Well, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to talk about, but I might do a show coming up here on movies that I've seen this year, 2025. And my thoughts so far about, for what it's worth, my thoughts so far around this year after coming out of 2024, which was a just kind of an incredible year for films, especially if you're a fan of horror films. It was kind of amazing. There were so many great films that came out, some really fantastic movies. I mean, we had Dune 2, we had Long Legs, we had In a Violent Nature, Late Night with the Devil, we had Maxine, Nosferatu, The Substance, and I know I'm probably leaving out something or a few other movies, but that all of those films came out last year, and I know again there's got to be Oddity is another one, amazing film. So there's and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few, but that was just pretty much all last year, 2024. And this year, 2025, I have to say so far really sucks. So I don't know, maybe there's not, again, like I said, there's not a whole lot of movies to talk about this year, which is really weird as far as new movies go. I've been, I always go back to today's show is going to be on a film from 1973. So I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But lately I've been really, it's always my thing to kind of go back. Favorite decade being the 70s and 80s, but especially the 70s. And I always, go back to that. But lately I've been watching a lot of older films, maybe more than usual, but as far as new films go, the only movie that I really liked so far was The Monkey by Osgood Perkins, who did Longlegs, which is a really awesome movie. I did a big review on that. I saw that in the theater, but that's been it. That's literally been it as far as what I've seen this year in 2025 as far as new releases. Everything else has been like just forgettable. I can't even think of anything that I've seen. And I've seen quite a few new movies. I have not been to the theater very much at all this year. I've so far just once, which is crazy. But yeah, so I don't know. So maybe I won't do a show on my thoughts of 2025 because it depressingly and it it sounds depressing saying it, but there's not a whole lot to talk about. So it's very weird. It's very very weird. So yeah, I'm probably going to scrap that idea because it's going to be a pretty short show. And I'm all about supporting new things, but I don't know. I don't know. The one other thing I kind of wanted to mention because it was on my mind. It's kind of funny. It's kind of silly and stupid, but I kind of think it alludes to something maybe kind of serious. You know. So I have two friends that are incredibly talented musicians, and one of them, there's one of them is, well, not a lot, but is older than the other person by probably about 12, 13, possibly 15 years, but 12, I'd say 12 years. One of the persons that is involved in this possible kind of, well, they are working on this project together, and I've been hearing updates about it. But one of the persons in the project is about 12, 15 years older, and the other party had, basically did some writing and then recorded some of this material and then gave it to this other person who is the older person in the party to see what they think, see if they're excited about it, see if there's some cool things, some cool ideas, in the mix. And when they received it, they really, I heard the music too, and I was like, yeah, this is very cool. There's a lot of potential with some different things. And then when they heard that these pieces, these ideas, these musical ideas, they were very very excited and pumped. And right away, that person said to the person who created the music, they were saying, they started making these references, and they're like, yeah, I could see this kind of a vibe, or establishing this kind of an idea, but it really really reminds me of this movie from the 70s, like 72. It's And then they went on. He couldn't think of the title of the movie, but he made all these references to the movie, thinking it would, jar the title. And they couldn't come up with the title, and she had no idea what he was talking about. So then the conversation continued, and he brought up like three or four. From what I gather from the conversation, he brought up like three or four references to film movie references, and and finally, after three or four tries, nothing was registering with her. There was no point of reference, and what she said, her excuse or her reasoning for not understanding these like references to these particular films, and I think most of these films were like in the 70s or maybe even early 80s, but I think mainly the 70s, was that, oh, those are, those were, I wasn't even a thought then. I wasn't born then, so I have no idea what you're talking about. And she used this as this thing. And then so she told me this story, and I thought that was pretty funny. And I'm like, on one hand, it's hilarious and totally silly and goofy and funny. But on the other hand, I said to her, like, yeah, no, that's hilarious that happened. That everything kind of passed over your head. You had no idea what he was trying to reference. But I was also like, come on, really? Like that's kind of a, it's kind of a lame excuse for, you know, for not understanding those things. And she proceeded to say, well, I was born this year, in the 80s, and I, you know, have never seen these particular films, and they came way before me, so I just have no reference point. And I'm like, but don't you? And I said, well, don't you watch? You've watched like a shit ton of older films, like films from the 60s, 70s, and you know something about film, like you have some really good taste. You've talked a lot about, movies like, movies with Humphrey Bogart, and, The African Queen and Casablanca being some of your favorite films, The Godfather being some of your favorite films. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense then. And I said, and then I said, I was kind of being funny, but then I also said, I, on an average week, I watch movies that came out either the year I was born or years before I was born, where I would have no literal reference point to that film, especially from that age. So all of the movies that I watch are movies that predated my silly existence. So it doesn't have. That's just an excuse for like, you know, um, blowing that off. So it's just kind of funny. But anyway, so today's show is on a movie that I know I've done a show on before. But my God, this movie is such a masterpiece, and that is Thriller, not the Michael Jackson song or video, but Thriller, A Cruel Picture. This movie is an utter masterpiece. It's from 1973. It's a Swedish rape and revenge film, and it was directed. It was directed by Arne Fibonacci, a Swedish director. This came out in '73, and recently I've been hearing a lot about this film again because I guess over the years, the last 5 or 10 years, Quentin Tarantino has talked about this film being one of his favorite exploitation movies, and this movie is an exploitation movie. It is it is incredibly raw. It is a nasty film. It is incredibly violent. And again, I think it's one of those films, and it's one of the most. That being said, it's one of the most badass movies ever made. I mean, if you like revenge movies, this is it. But I say that with a little bit of a disclaimer because there's things in this movie that are shocking, very shocking, and incredibly graphic. That are just like you kind of can't believe what you're seeing. But ultimately, this movie is one of the most badass action movies. Amazing kills, and it's an extraordinary film. I mean, it's so beautifully shot. I can't believe that this fucking came out in '73. I mean, again, going back to what I said before with my two friends about not understanding kind of these pop culture film references. '73. So, um, extraordinary. Just an extraordinary film. I bought this beautiful edition. This is a Vinegar Syndrome. Vinegar Syndrome is also one of the boutique labels that they're probably I'd say, I don't know, commercially, as far as popular boutique labels, I would say Vinegar Syndrome, Arrow, and also Severin are the most popular as far as having the biggest sales or the most well known. Vinegar Syndrome might be the biggest, but and I have a lot of Vinegar Syndrome movies, and they do an incredible job. I've been doing a shit ton of videos and watching a shit ton of Mono Macabre videos, but their stuff. I mean, they have a big niche, and their Mono Macabre is very, very successful for what they are. But they're definitely, I think, more underground than Vinegar Syndrome. They're not, as popular. I wouldn't say commercially like a Vinegar Syndrome or Severin. I think they focus. Well, they all focus on exploitation movies, but they tend to be a little bit more underground as far as I think they show Mono Cabra finds the most even more obscure shit, like shit that you can't even believe was even made, kind of a thing. So I'm uploading a video for another Mono Macabre movie, A Haunted Turkish Bathhouse, which is just completely fucking insane, but it's an amazing film, an old Japanese film. So, but Thriller is an extraordinary movie, and again, like I've seen it pop up in different interviews and different clips where Tarantino has talked about this film as being, one of his favorite exploitation movies, and I guess like a few years ago there was a big film festival. I don't know if it was. I don't think it was the Cannes Film Festival. It might have been the Venice Film Festival, but it was some European festival. I think within the last 5 years or something. That's a big to do festival, and they had like they showed this film at this festival. They kind of brought it back with like a new print. I think it was a restored version of the film, and they had this premiere at one of these major festivals, and Tarantino introduced it, I guess. And I guess this movie also had, and you can totally see it, but this movie had a huge influence on Tarantino when he made the Kill Bill films, which are, amazing. They're masterpieces. I have not done a show on the Kill Bill movies, which I need to because those movies are just amazing. Yeah, and it's interesting watching Thriller, and I've seen this movie quite a few times, and this is definitely one of my favorite revenge movies, one of the greatest exploitation movies ever made. But I watched this again last night, and I'm like, wow, like there are so many similarities between. You can see how this movie really, really influenced Kill Bill. Like, even with like Daryl Hannah's character with the eye patch, like, and the kills, the whole sense of like urgency and revenge. There's martial arts, the martial arts, and the whole Hong Kong martial arts film influence, obviously, in Kill Bill. It's actually that's really a martial arts film at the end of the day, but it's got and the Thriller. There's all kinds of like really amazing fight sequences. There's a lot of martial arts in this film too, but not like in a like a Hong Kong style, but definitely is a martial arts element. The lead protagonist, the lead character, she goes through this after living in this like living hell. She eventually tries to break free and from her captors, and is slowly transforming herself into this totally badass killing fucking machine, But she goes through like literally hell on earth. It's just amazing, and the music, and again the transfer of this film on Blu-ray is so spectacular. But I would say like it's interesting because Tarantino, obviously very very popular director. I think he's one of the greatest directors around. He's one of I love his stuff, and so and I think in virtually every one of his films you see the influence of exploitation cinema in all of his films. From Inglorious Bastards to The Hateful Eight, which I just love, is one of my favorite. Especially Jackie Brown, I feel like that one really has that kind of classic '70s kind of exploitation vibe. Pulp Fiction. I mean, really every film he's done has that vibe. So, and Kill Bill. So it's really interesting, you know. And it's funny because I think it's safe to say that Tarantino is a massively popular, iconic director. He's very popular, and he's a huge name. And it's pretty obvious when you watch his films, at least for me. Like you can see, and he talks about. I mean, he's an insane madman when it comes to the history of cinema, of course. And he learned everything from working at a video store. He never took any classes. He just, his just from watching movies. That was his education. And so, he's got so many references in his films, but I think it's safe to say a lot of people who see his films probably don't know too much about his influences to the degree of like, when I see a Tarantino film, you know, the last Tarantino movie that I bought on Blu-ray, and I did a show on it a little while ago, which is, and I think it's a fucking masterpiece, is The Hateful Eight with Kurt Russell and Samuel L. Jackson. I love that fucking movie to death. It's such a badass movie. But that movie is so influenced by exploitation. In particularly like the Sergio Leone films. I mean, he even had Ennio Morricone do the film score, and he won an Academy Award for it. All the spaghetti westerns, but exploitation in general is just such a massive influence on that film and all of his films. But I think it's safe to say a lot of people who are, um, you know, love his films, but they haven't like checked out that style of cinema to see where he got and gained all those influences. Because there's always some element of these films in his movies, and that's what I love about you know love about his work. And for me, it's also helped me dive further into this kind of sleazy world of exploitation, because I see like what that's like. Like way back when they had Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino partnered up and did The Grindhouse, where they showed two movies back to back: Planet Terror by Robert Rodriguez and then Death Proof by Tarantino. And I saw both of those films. It was a long time ago now, which is crazy. It was probably like 10 or 12 years ago. But basically what they were trying to do, and it wasn't successful because it bombed in the box office, but unfortunately. But what they did was they showed both movies back to back with all of the classic, all of these kind of, makeshift, or all of these kind of retro, you know, trashy exploitation trailers, and that was they tried to bring back that experience of what it was like to go to see exploitation movies, these low budget horror movies, in the theater back in the day in the 70s and 80s, because that was how people saw movies. You would go and spend the whole day and pay a ticket and, go and watch these completely depraved movies back to back and it would be like, $2 or whatever. And you'd sit in the cinema and you'd probably go to some kind of sleazy theater to see these films. But that was a regular thing. That was how people made, well, that's how the directors of these films, made money. I mean, you had people like directors like Hersch and Gordon Lewis that were like massively successful during that time, putting out these complete trash movies, and they were, making a shit ton of money doing this. And it was, an amazing time period, for the or in the the history for the history of cinema. I wish I could relive that experience. But I remember going to see the Grindhouse show with both of these movies, and it was amazing. It was amazing. It was so fun. It was fucking wild. It was crazy, and it was just so good. And I remember going to see it at the Colonial Theatre in Belfast. And it was a long, excursion. It was a long time, but because you're in the theater for like 3 or 4 hours. But it was so fucking fun. The trailers were amazing. It was just great. And I wish that was more of an experience, but now instead of that, people like to, people bitch and moan about the length of films. I mean, movies are long sometimes, but people bitch and moan about the length of films, but yet they'll sit home on their ass and stream a movie or a TV show for fucking 5 hours. So whatever. But anyway, getting back to Thriller, I will say like this movie is definitely a balls to the wall action movie. I mean, it's just amazing, and I can't believe that this came out in '73. It's incredible. It looks and feels like it came out in 2025, as far as I'm concerned. The transfer of this film onto Blu-ray is just gorgeous. The remastering of the sound, I mean, everything from top to bottom is just impeccable. And so, but that being said, I would say that this movie is not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's fucking brutal, like really brutal. There's moments in this film where it's generally hard to watch, and for me, like I said in previous videos, in a really recent video, I have a very high tolerance for watching, uh, brutality on film. Whether it's um, you know, sexual or violent, violently graphic or sexual sequences. I have a pretty high threshold, and also violence and gore. Extreme gore. It takes a lot for for me to be bothered by a film. I don't really feel like it's. I have a pretty high threshold because I realize it's the land of make believe too, and it's subjective, and it's one of the criticisms that I've heard with people who don't like exploitation movies and say that, well, it's just chock filled with, violence against women. Well, in particular, Siskel and Ebert, the famous movie reviewers, used to shit on exploitation movies for, they kind of made it part of their business to say that these movies were pro violence against women, and that all these exploitation movies were just sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, and basically were pro of all of the horrible things of our nature, basically, and that they were exploiting these things. And I really disagree with that in every way possible. And I've had conversations with people over that because some people are like, they these films, again, in the exploitation world, you have all kinds of films. You have films that are silly and goofy and very lighthearted, and but then you also have films in the exploitation movie world that are, brutal as fuck, and they're really serious. Movies like, well, Thriller, it's kind of a serious movie. Other movies like Infernal Rapist, movies that really are extreme, or Castle of the Creeping Flesh, which I've talked about, that are very extreme and push the fucking boundaries, so far that you can't really see where the goalpost is. But to me, it's escapism, and movies that show these kinds of nature, the nature of these really dark taboos, or these really dark ideas, even topics like where one of the forbidden things for people is to see movies or sequences where children are getting killed, things like that are these taboos. But I feel like what these movies do, is show, especially movies in the exploitation world, you know, and I think it's still there, obviously, and it's unfortunately coming back. But on one hand, it's pure escapism, and I think what horror films do is they really deal with. It's a real healthy way to deal with your fear and getting over your fear of that insecurity, of being harmed, and facing your fears essentially. And it's also an amusement park ride. So, but when it comes to like extreme cinema, like a film like this, or even like a haunted Turkish bathhouse, which is extreme cinema, where it's very serious, and it's not really lighthearted. It's not really there's no comedic elements to it, if you will. but it's just so ridiculous and and insane and over the top. I think if anything, movies that show these kinds of graphic, violent things, I think it represents, like, our unfortunate history of how people will treat each other. And I think that we can't ignore that because that is something from our past and it's something we still deal with now. And it's part of that cathartic area of like understanding that in a healthy way. And I think also, I think people, you know, we all have from an escapist perspective. It's like, you know, we all have our bad days. There's always days where maybe it could be a coworker and we get in an argument or a potential argument with a coworker or a friend, and our instinct is to tell that person to go fuck off or to, like, punch them in the face, or we're driving in the car and someone kind of cuts us off, or gives us the finger, or somebody, and we want to like get really angry and pissed off and confrontational. And that is always the wrong way to deal with stress and anxiety, obviously. But I think, like with art, you can get those feelings out in a totally safe and cathartic way and deal with those, because really all that is our own personal insecurities, because we can't take criticism or somebody who is kind of threatening our plate. So, but film and cinema and art, like, when it comes to these things, we can it's like putting on a punk rock record or a metal album. You get out your aggressions and it feels good and it's cathartic. And it's, so you have to acknowledge that these things are part of our culture. And the other thing about a lot of these exploitation movies, especially this movie with Thriller, is, 9 times out of 10, it's always the protagonist, the hero of the day, who kind of saves the day, is a woman. All of the men fucking die in half of these films. Pretty much every, very rare with all of the exploitation movies I watch, horror films, what have you. It's always usually the a female protagonist, female hero at the end of the day that kicks everyone's ass and saves the day. They go through hell and high water, but they ultimately rise to the occasion. So it's empowering, if anything. But that being said, Thriller, like describing this movie as an action movie and as a kind of like the ultimate revenge tale, that's all true. But that being said, this movie is super graphic, and I would say it's not for everyone. It's shocking, like really, really shocking. So I would tell anybody, like, even if I thought about like having some friends over to watch this movie, I would, depending on who that person was or persons, I would give them a little bit of disclaimer because of some of the graphic nature of this film. Basically, the lead character, this woman, is, the whole story more or less is about this woman who is goes on this date and is basically drugged, and then she is brought into the world of sex trafficking, and she becomes addicted on heroin and is turned into this sex slave for this pimp, essentially. And he pimps her out to all of these wealthy people, doctors, all these fucking scumbags, and she is essentially turned into this sex, or he turns her, this guy turns her into a sex trafficker, and turns her into a prostitute. But in order to control her, he gets her addicted to heroin, and it's just brutal. And eventually she breaks free and fucking kills every motherfucker, and it's just badass. But there's scenes of there's a lot of rape in this movie, and it's graphic as all fucking hell. It's kind of awful. It's hard to watch. So that's one thing I would tell people, like, be careful because it could be a little much. I think for this film, it's kind of needed because you really see how fucked up these the male characters are in this film, and when they die, they die. They die like the dogs that they are, and it's amazing, and it's the ultimate payoff. So it really shows how depraved these characters are. And the thing too that's interesting with with say pornography in film, and what what's a film that has say graphic sex, like you take for instance a movie, say, like Fatal Attraction, Glenn Close and Michael Douglas, classic thriller movie, really awesome movie. I love that movie to death. I want to do a show on that eventually. I don't think I have done a show on it. But you take that movie, and it's like, it's got very graphic sex in it, and it's kind of extreme to a point, and but you don't see any frontal nudity, and you definitely don't see penetration. And usually, like the way the laws kind of work and how ratings go, from what I gather, like softcore porn are films that like show like full frontal nudity, where they'll show vaginas, they'll show genitals, penises, erect penises. They'll show those. If that's in a film, that's kind of considered to be softcore porn, and a film that shows those kinds of things, could get an X rating, but it's more considered to be softcore porn, of where you don't see penetration, you don't see bodily fluids. Softcore porn is often shown on like Cinemax, in hotel rooms, those kinds of things. So what's the difference between that and then films that show, like, what makes a porn, get that title as a porn? And so what usually, from what I gather, I'm not a specialist in this area, but from what I've read and from what I've gathered, when a movie qualifies as like a hardcore porn or full on pornography, where it will get a triple X rating and won't get that wide distribution, is if in the film, when there's a sexual act, if they show actual penetration and bodily fluids. If they show that in a film, that is considered full on porn. So it's interesting. And there is, I mean, Fatal Attraction is maybe, well, I guess kind of a good example. That's not an exploitation movie, but kind of a good example. So I think you have two levels or three levels of sexuality in film. Like, I use that as an example. Like, Fatal Attraction, amazing thriller, it's such an awesome movie, but that's a very commercial, big Hollywood studio film. And so you have films that will have sexual acts, but they don't show any frontal nudity. It's an R-rated movie. A film like that will get an R rating. And then you have films, like I said, that can, once they show, if they show naked genitals and things like that, that would be, and it's funny. It's a funny, weird balance, because films that show breasts will still get an R rating, but if they start showing, like, say, for a woman, if they show her vagina, that would be considered softcore porn, more or less, and that could go beyond an R rating. And for a film or a filmmaker, that can be a very inhibiting thing, because that automatically moves you to a smaller market. And then you have films where they do show penetration and those things. That is considered to be pornography, and I think fundamentally those are the differences between those three things. So it's like three levels as far as sexuality on film. And the interesting thing with Thriller is they do show full penetration and the exchange of bodily fluids when it comes to the sexual scenes in this movie. And there's numerous. And it's brutal and it's hard to watch. Not sexy. But again, I think it really emphasizes the story and does the story justice, even though it's so extreme. So that would be a disclaimer I would tell people about this movie, is that those aspects. I can imagine seeing this movie in the fucking theater and just being like, oh my god, you know. But it's a fucking masterpiece. I can't say enough things about this movie. It's got to be one of the most badass movies ever made. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.